Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets go into Philadelphia with, let's just say, a fully healthy roster and somehow find themselves losing to what I can only describe as the 76ers B squad. We break down, though, the performance from Ben Simmons as he continues to try to improve his game this season, some of the rotation question marks we had, and the obvious glaring issues on the defensive end. All coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. My boy, Andy Mack, we thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, I wish this had gone another way, but like the true hero that I am, I showed up anyway to host this podcast. How are we feeling after the embarrassing loss for Brooklyn?
Oh, terrible. What a brutal loss. It's so bad. It's so bad on so many levels. I'm laughing because it's like you really couldn't have scripted it worse. It really is one of those things where
this is what we do.
Everything is lined up perfectly for this to not only be a W, an easy W, right? Like your significant favorites. Philly has nobody. I mean, in terms of superstar talent, Nets getting sort of everyone back here, Yuta Watanabe aside. And it's just like, and then you're like, oh, what a soft landing for Simmons, who we'll talk about here in a second. He's headed back to Philly, but they don't have to face any of the music with the other guys coming back the other way, except for Doc. And they just absolutely tank it. It's just hilarious. It's hilarious. I couldn't go any other way with this team. Just when you think they got you right where they want you, you're starting to feel pretty good. You're like, Simmons is looking good. It's all lining up. And then they just pull the rug. It really is wash, rinse, repeat with this team. It's hilarious. What are you going to do? How can you do anything but laugh? It's like nothing changes with this team. It's amazing.
Just when I thought you couldn't be any dumber, you go and pull a move like this. We're going to get into Ben Simmons first and foremost here, the defense, the rotations, everything else. But bad news, friends. I made a pretty bold proclamation publicly. There's no Thanksgiving coming because I assumed that this was going to be the kind of game that we got to come on here laughing at how good it looked for Brooklyn. That was not the case. So we did say, though, coming into this game, the last two games for Ben Simmons, and you mentioned their soft landing spot, you thought, okay, with all these players out for Philadelphia, Ben Simmons can go back to Philadelphia, get booed on every single touch that he has throughout the entire game, and then hopefully put together a respectable performance. He actually put together a nice performance for himself. He was ready for this game.
Yeah, that's the amazing part of this whole thing is that Simmons was actually really good, which makes it even just double terrible that they end up losing the game because Simmons, if you told yourself a story around this game where you're like, okay, the boos really got to him and he looked just stiff and they end up losing the game. And then you start to tell yourself like a weird story around what the rest of the season looks like. And it's one game. So I want to remind everyone of that. But then where the part where Simmons comes out and actually looks really good, like actually, frankly, energized by the crowd, especially early. He looked really energized and aggressive really early and really maintained that for the whole game. He played really well. It was just everything else was a mess. And that's actually the most hilarious part of this whole thing because you would think they would go together, right? You think it would be, Simmons, cowers in the face of a hostile Philly crowd, right. And the Nets have trouble, kind of making up the difference, except that that's just not even what happened, so if you told someone before the game and said something along the lines of Simmons is going to play one of his best games of the year, mm-hmm. You'd be like, and it's against this undermanned Philly team, you'd be like, the Nets win by 40? What would be the scenario? And it's just for it to go even the opposite direction of that. It's just such an absolute head scratcher.
Yeah, on the one hand, it's a head scratcher. On the other hand, it's like totally consistent with what the Brooklyn Nets have had go on for them. But And I, tongue in cheek say that Simmons had 3 blocks in this game, 3 steals in this game, all those things. I'm just going to pull out one of the nuggets that I liked specifically from him on the defensive end, which will go against the grain of what we saw in this game overall. But we were waiting so much about the confidence offensively. But when more we looked at these games, we also remembered and reminded everybody picks up a lot of fouls here. Can't seem to, get out of his own way defensively. Has been fouling out a lot. I liked seeing, and I know I'm trying to find a moment here for him on that end of the court, or the team on that end of the court. He seemed to be rotating side to side defensively in almost this free safety defensive role a lot of the times, and helping out on weak side blocks, helping out in other defensive areas. Now, everything else wasn't necessarily working around him, but that did seem like something additional to what kind of the base has been for him so far these last 3 games.
Yeah, I want to talk about the defense here a little later in the show. It was an overhelping mess.
Specifically.
Yeah, it was like an overhelping mess, and we're trying to start with like the one positive here, only because it is Simmons. And I agree with you. I think that the defense for him, like when they do that, I think there is going to be a world where it works. And I just think in general, if you want to take any good from this game, and believe me, it's tough, but if you want to take a good from this game, it's that of all the games where Simmons could have been really, really bad and had a lot of excuses and fed a narrative around him, the only positive, and believe me, this is the only one, the only positive from this game is that at least you don't walk out with the Simmons isn't up for it narrative.
Fragile
like
Simmons.
That, that would have been the easiest one. That was an absolute windmill dunk ready to come if he looks bad in any shape or form. The fact that he didn't, if you want to use anything, and again, we're grasping here, but if you want to use anything to take from this one, I think you can feel okay that Simmons walked into a very hostile, not real hostile, sports hostile environment, right? With a group of people. There's really, I challenge you to find another fan base that wants to see a single player fail as much as the Philly fans want to see Ben Simmons. I'm not, that is not hyperbole. That is the truth. Like these guys, these fans, especially the hardcore Sixers ones, are nuts for him to be terrible. Like, believe me, it's if you're not on Twitter or these other places, you don't see it. It's for sure. So the fact that with all that lined up against it, and you could hear them, you could see them, the shirts, everything was going. They at least don't walk out of the game with that as bulletin board material. Nothing else was good, but that one would have been one of the easiest ones, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, and I thought before the game, they talked to him, they asked him about Philly. I think he, again, this is from a PR perspective, but I thought that his energy was right because he came into it saying, I got nothing but respect for a lot of the people in Philadelphia, respect the fan base. I expect it to be hostile. I expect him to be, booing me, et cetera. Like he seemed very much prepared for what it was going to look like. Even was interacting like he was playing with a little bit of a cockiness that we haven't seen from him as a Brooklyn Net. And again, only these last few games where you'd think he would have a reason to be cocky. I will throw in just as the extra bonus for him, 11 assists. Like if you're 2 guys that put down a sizable bet at the start of the year for him to lead the league in assists, this is a good sign in the right direction.
I can't believe we're even still thinking about that. I forgot. I wrote that one off long ago.
Problem is, Doug, once we make the miss, we gotta carry that thing over our backs all the way down the beach.
He's
just outside of the top 60 in the league right now. I think there's still a chance. But it was a good example of him offensively distributing, again, just the rhythm and the energy that he's been able to play with. The fluidity was there. It's hard to compartmentalize this, but I still think that this was not as good as the last game for him, but it was another step in the right direction of, I don't know, give me 4, give me 5, give me 6 games in a row like this. And then I stop wondering if there's going to be a letdown for Ben.
Yeah, like I don't think we walk out of questions here. He looks completely healthy. We have questions around the rest of the team, and we might even have questions around his fit on the team, right? I think these are still lingering issues that are not solved. I don't think the entire Ben Simmons experience is anywhere close to solved here. Like there's other issues, which we'll get into later in this podcast, around like his overall fit with some of the other personnel on the team. But again, just to reiterate, this game, the major concern, like the national talking point for this game was teed up for TNT, for all of it, to be teed up to be a national game where there was probably a certain contingent of people, and not just Sixers fans, that would have loved. It would have been much easier to have things to talk about. Were Simmons to have gone over 6, look super timid, right? Like fouled out in 20 minutes, like all these different ways it could have gone, and that just doesn't happen. Again, the Nets are kind of a mess after this loss, but like it's not a Simmons related thing. All right. we got more to talk about here. Going to talk about the Nets defense, or, whatever the semblance of that showed up on the court tonight. We're going to talk about the size and the rebounding, obviously, as well, because these are continued talking points among the Nets faithful in terms of where it is, sort of problematic areas. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Turo, the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts. You browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget. It's all across the US, the UK, Canada, coming soon to our friends down under over there in Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. You can grab a classic or luxury car for a special event, a birthday, or a holiday. You can grab an economy car if you're on a budget. Just need to get from point A to, where it is, point B. Test drive that new electric vehicle if you had your eye on. See how it fits with your everyday life. Turo's got you covered for all of these different scenarios and more. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. Forget boring car rentals and find your drive at Turo.com. Adam, you're muted. There you go, buddy.
Well, you should have seen the way I just spoke. So 115-106, the Brooklyn Nets lose to the Philadelphia 76ers. Don't kid yourself. It was not that close. Jacques Vaughn and the Nets waved the white flag a little over 3 minutes to go. I'll touch on this briefly before we get into the defense, because we were mentioning it before we started, that on the broadcast on TNT, they were like, poof, long ways to go yet in this one, getting out of there a little bit early if you're Jacques Vaughn. And I was like, no. There is no more thing to do here. And so much of that was tied to the defensive side of the court, where the Brooklyn Nets, for all the positives we tried to there selectively put onto Ben Simmons, this was as bad as the defense, I think, has looked, even relative to that 153-point disaster against the Kings. Remember who you're playing on the Philadelphia 76ers, and then just the repeated errors that just seem to be happening possession in, possession out, especially when we talk about perimeter defense closing out wide open looks, 16-32 from deep for the Sixers.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it was so bad. The point of attack defense, it's not even point of attack, because it was more just like switching and over helping and just getting, caught and trying to keep guys out of the lane, and then just leaving wide open shooters. The Sixers shot 50%, 16 for 32 from three. None of them looked outside of like a Furkan Korkmaz sort of off balance shot. None of them looked all that difficult. They were rarely contested. And it's not like this is, a second coming of Steph Curry and Klay Thompson over here. This is Shake Milton, DeAnthony Melton, guys like this. I mean, Niang and Korkmaz can shoot, but it's not like this team you would think would come in and just be able to shoot the total lights out of the building. And none of it looked hard. The Nets were completely discombobulated around the perimeter. They were switching everything, except that when the ball would get into the lane at times, they would send a help, like Simmons would help or something like that, and then they wouldn't be able to close out the three. They had a million offensive rebounds that led to more threes. So it was the second chance points were, again, a total mess. It all combined to just be really tough to watch. It was so bad on the defensive end, kind of in every level. Right? Yeah. Like every level was bad. They couldn't stop anything from three, because they couldn't just body up any of these shooters at all. They got lost on switches. And then they would get back cut and layup line to death. Like, even that happened a little bit more early on. It was just all bad across the board. And even when they would get like a mini stop, the Sixers just got an offensive rebound. Yeah. So it wasn't like nothing. It was just a complete onslaught, most of which was the Nets' own doing.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, that's the other part of it too. I mean, especially when you think about the lineup that you're taking on here, a lot of it was kind of self-inflicted wounds. I'll highlight two players here. I know we're going to get into rotation specific stuff in a minute, but we've talked about Joe Harris, and this can be a both and. Obviously, he has a terrible shooting night, but then even more important, not more importantly, but relative to the way at least I've talked about him early in the season, hey, he's coming back from an injury. That shot eventually you assume is going to fall. And he is trying to do a lot of the things away from the basketball that you at least say it's serviceable. But tonight it wasn't serviceable in any form or fashion, specifically with him at that guard and inside of some of those rotations where they were, this is you, by the way, Doug, pointing out, they were just hunting him down the way that we always fear Patty Mills gets hunted down when he's out there.
Late when they
Sorry.
knew the Nets were switching everything around the perimeter, there was at least 4 possessions where they hunted out the final switch to be Harris. Like it was wash, rinse, repeat again with wanting to just get, Tobias Harris on him or another guard onto him by just running through the pass off of the different switches and kind of knowing it was going to happen and ending with Harris, who then just couldn't stop anybody. I mean, mostly Tobias. Sorry, there's 2 Harrises here. It was Tobias onto Joe Harris. I don't want to make this game all about Joe Harris because there was other problems. He was awful. So there's no excuse for that part of it. I don't think he's the only reason they lost, but he sure didn't contribute in any other way. It was probably his worst game of the season, just between the shooting, the defensive miscues. He mishandled the ball a couple times. He got like a couple shots blocked. I mean, there was no positives from the Harris angle, but really it was just thematic of the entire Nets experience here. The defensive end, I don't know if it's a combination of disinterested, not knowing what's going on, and then you combine that with being a little undersized, even against, a B team squad. Like there's just too much to make up. You can't be all those things, right? You can't be discombobulated, undersized, and lack energy. Like when all 3 of those combine, this is what happens. This is exactly what happens. The other team shoots 50% from 3 and they get every offensive rebound, and you just lose. You can't win in that scenario.
And it's hard too because I was just flashing over the box score with Kevin Durant putting up 20 points on 9 of 14. Again, like a kind of a relatively quiet night for him. Kyrie Irving, we're specifically talking about the defensive side of it. This is one of those instances, by the way, if I'm going to give not passes, but if I'm going to give wiggle room to a lot of guys who are coming off of injury or coming back into it, we've been so used to when Kyrie Irving comes back from whatever may be his absence from the team, he's one of those rare guys that steps on the court and looks absolutely locked in. He was a little bit quieter offensively the first game. This game, he gets his looks, but not in the kind of dominating, take over the game way that you would like to see it. And then defensively, which is the entire team, by the way, like the entire team, but he was about as lackadaisical on that end as you could be as well.
Yeah, like there's really no superlatives.
I just want to bring on another
we cooked our first 10 minutes on Simmons, and then because there was really nothing else to be positive about here. And to point out, it's tough to point out a single bad actor here with the way things went.
No,
but the Nets, but again, like the way you allow substandard teams to beat you, right? Like really kind of the only way that it can happen, because usually talent will win out, right? Like in the aggregate, talent wins. That's just why a 7-game series, for the most part, the better team in the playoffs and the finals is going to win, because talent and to some degree coaching will just come to the top. Like that's just how basketball works. Like it doesn't work. But the way you allow lesser teams into games, and the Nets have done this, time and time again at times, is to fail at these sort of fundamental parts of the game that just will make it ultimately easier for the other team to get enough threes, enough good looks, enough second chances. If you give any group of players that, like, they're going to make it a game. Like if you're good enough to be in the NBA and you're going to allow those things to happen against you, most players, no matter what the Nets talent is, like most players on the other side will be able to stick in the game, because that's just like you just win too many of these little battles. And that's, this game was, it was like every possession was like that.
Well, that's like, you look at Melton with his 22, 16 for Milton.
None of them were hard. By the way, sorry to cut you off. None of those points were difficult. They were all easy.
That's like maybe it's why I'm just speaking to some of the smaller players. And we know Harris is sometimes getting caught up playing, against a power forward in the course of this game. But a lot of the backcourt defensively ends up becoming a pretty consistent issue against the team you expect to beat. But you have to at least be able to go toe to toe and outplay some of these. And then you see Paul Reed come off the bench with the 19. I'm not going to drill down on any specific possessions here, but when you look over the box score and just watch the game by the eye test, seeing those players have such easy and consistent access to their rhythm shooting is really what it comes down to. It wasn't disruptive. And I think the one thing that I sometimes get caught in, especially early in this year, where we've seen how good Kevin Durant has been on both ends of the floor. You have Ben Simmons out there. You have Nicholas Claxton out there. You want to think if this had been Embiid and the starters for Philly, I wouldn't necessarily have the same sentiment. But you're within earshot of this game all the way through. You take a lead at one point back after having a 10-2 run to start this thing. You thought it was going to be the blowout. you can't get the stops. Like, you can't find a way to 3 or 4 possessions of getting stops just to see if the offense can carry the load for you. That's probably the biggest frustration out of one that I'll easily bury in the rear view and not think about. But that's the part of it where, like, you have enough of the personnel to get key stops in key moments, and they haven't been able to do that with consistency.
Yeah, no, they haven't been. And then it was like a situation where once Philly sort of smelled blood in the water and were finding things that were just going to work, like getting into the lane, knowing that a help defender was going to tag and just like try to help a little bit, and they were going to find an open shooter, like sort of, or like once they could get Harris onto Harris, things like this. Like once they knew those things were going to work, and not having to worry too much about even if you miss, like having with a high level of confidence that you were going to get the ball back even after a miss, like those things.
20 to 4 offensive rebounds, which you pointed out pre-show.
I said it off the well, yeah, it was 20 to 4. Sorry, I cut you off. Yeah, it was 20 to 4 in the offense. I mean, that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Like, and I don't even, and that's actually beyond. We're gonna switch over to the rotations here in a second, but the 20 to 4 is beyond just we can't ring in with just like the Nets need a center. That's an effort issue. Like this, it's an effort issue. It's not just a size issue. When you get absolutely dominated like this on the offensive rebounding glass, it's not just that the Nets have 3 players that they started that are 7 feet tall. It's not that it's not necessarily all a size thing, right? I get they don't have a ton of girth. They started 3 guys. Well, I know Simmons isn't 7 feet. They started 3 guys 6'10" or above. Right. At that point, losing the offensive rebounding game 20 to 4 is an effort thing. It's like that's all it is. It's just a lack of effort and a lack of staying committed to sort of the task. So I know people are going to jump in about the center thing, but like it's definitely more than that. All right, we'll talk about this rotation thing here in a second as well. Going to talk to you first about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Our friends over at BetOnline had the Nets -8 going into this game. And a little nugget here. No team in the league has been worse against the spread than the Brooklyn Nets over the last couple of years. Just one of the many things you're going to find over there at BetOnline. You get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. Football, soccer, basketball, esports. It's all over there at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts like this one, you're going to find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head on over to the website today on that mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And of course, we always thank you for making the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen of the day. Why don't you make the second listen Locked On Sports Today? From the games that matter most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local analysis that only the Locked On Podcast Network can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. And this was the one thing that from the beginning, which they went on a 10-2 run to start the game, so it's hard to necessarily lean into it. But for the starting rotation in this one, obviously Ben's been playing well, and you would assume that he's getting closer to being in that starting lineup than not. But having Nicholas Claxton reinserted back into that rotation with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Royce O'Neal, I'm not saying that I know exactly what the solution is or if it's just a simple, that's it, put Nicholas Claxton automatically coming off the bench. But I was surprised that they went back to the thing that from Steve Nash over to Jacques Vaughn, you've gotten some consistent sample sizes here that tell us it's not going to work at least consistently enough where you don't end up running into real issues.
Yeah, I was surprised by that as well. And that was not actually a thing that was initially announced. I think it was announced that it was going to be Claxton back to the bench and Simmons was going to start. And then it was changed. Actually, I don't know if the Nets changed it themselves or the news was misreported. But either way, I'm only mentioning this because when it was mentioned that Claxton was going back to the bench or going to the bench and Simmons was going to start, that made sense to me as I'm doing like some minutes projections. And then as it was re-announced that Claxton was going to start with Simmons, I was like, okay, I'm interested to see why. I'm interested that they're going back there. I do think that the Nets are in a very tricky spot with this because we briefly talked about this before the show. But the problem here is, let's just say at worst, Simmons and Claxton let's agree that Simmons and Claxton are in your top 5 best players right now, right? Like, let's say whatever order you want to order them. Let's say Katie and Kyrie are 1, 2, and then whichever order we put in 3, 4, 5, Claxton and Simmons are going to be in those next three players, right? Would you agree with that?
Yep.
Okay. So with that as the premise, the problem here is that because those guys are now in the top 5 of best players overall, you sort of kind of have to start them together because you want to put your best players out there. Except that in this very specific situation, their skills do not complement each other at all. And so you get put in this terrible spot because you are then effectively having to play one of your top 5 best players much less than you would ever want to do in any normal situation. But what do you do? Right? Like, I don't know. Like they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. Like they don't have a solution here. So I get why they do it, but at the same time, you can just see all the problems in it too. So I don't know what the solution is. It's like you have to not start one of them and not play them together as much, and that probably makes you worse also. Like I don't really know the solution.
Yeah, I think I won't be shocked if it isn't the starting rotation tomorrow night. You mentioned about it being reported one way and then switching to from Claxton.
Again, that might have just been misreported from
right.
like an outlet. I'm not positive about that.
Right, and either way, maybe the quick switch is just to say, okay, Nicholas Claxton, you're going to come off the bench. The other detriment to this, I think, too, is I'm not going to say I'm going to push back on the idea of, but we talked about this before, the best players and the combinations of it. Like, if you convinced me that there's a version of the second unit that has Ben Simmons leading that just makes all the sense in the world, at least in the short term, I can continue to say, hey, you're playing really well. Let's not mess with what's working for us, right? And one of the reasons maybe why you do that, and you can flip it the other way if you want, but we know over the last few games when he was coming off the bench, Nicholas Claxton, before he missed, I think only 1, maybe 2 games, his relationship with Kevin Durant has looked that much stronger on the court. Their chemistry has been really good. But when you put Ben Simmons out there, it just diminishes Nicholas Claxton. Like, that's what ends up happening in these scenarios. Claxton gets a little bit diminished. They don't work well together to begin with. And then you end up having 2 non-shooters inside of the starting rotation that has, yes, a Royce O'Neal, who's also an offensive player, but not at the level that you'd want him to be. I mean, we talked about Yuta Watanabe not being available in this game. A player like that, you want to call him Yuta Watanabe because he's playing so great for the Nets right now, great. But they need to have someone that has that little bit of extra athleticism and then figure out the right combination. I think Claxton ends up going to the bench. I wouldn't be shocked as soon as tomorrow night, just because you can't, for a team that's trying to figure things out, you can't stop doing the things that have been working. And that felt like what they did by re-putting this starting lineup together tonight.
Yeah, just the on-off court numbers tell you what your eye already sees, right? Like, you already know it's going to get worse after tonight because this is not from PvP stats fully updated from tonight's game. But like Nick Claxton and Durant together, fine. That's a winning unit. With no Simmons, that's a winning unit, right? Plus 4.73. You're fine with it. Durant plus Simmons with no Claxton, about even, but the offense is really, really good, right? So you're like, you can live with it. And then when you get Durant, Claxton, and Simmons together, I'm using Durant because I'm just using it like with the best player on the court, right? So like, you want to try to give yourself the best out anyway. Minus 8.76. And again, it's going to get worse after tonight. Yeah. So the numbers tell you the thing that your eyes can see. And I agree with you. It is a shame because Claxton is a good player. Like, I'm not going to entertain ideas that he's not a good player. He's a starting center in the NBA, definitely. Like, that's just not even an independent opinion. Go ask actual X's and O's basketball people about this. Like, it's not a debate. It's undebatable. The problem is, like what you said, is that in these situations, it will make him look like he's not because the situation is so stacked against him. Whereas, like, when they were running these 2-man game with like Simmons, with Durant and Claxton before, and like he doesn't have to worry about spacing issues and things like that, it looks much better. And it does Simmons dirty too. Like, right. It does both of them dirty in these situations. So it's just like poorly constructed. And again, I don't know the solution because it really stinks to not play these guys a decent amount of minutes. Like, both of them on regular NBA teams would be playing real quality minutes, and it's probably going to be Claxton that goes, but like, that just stinks because he's played well enough to not have that be the case.
Yeah, and we've heard whispers of TJ Warren coming back some point, getting revalid at the start of December. When he gets maybe back into this rotation too, combined with the Yuta Watanabe, like, you can start to dream on second units or on combinations when Claxton and Simmons are on the floor and Durant is off and maybe Kyrie is off too, but you have the kind of scorers on there with them that you can get. I think at those points, sometimes their value can be better together than with a Kevin Durant because someone's falling out of that rhythm on the offensive end specifically. So, I mean, maybe there's a world where you can get to it. I guess the other thing to dream on here, because I'll be, by the way, as we close this one out, Doug will be giving you that post-game presser tomorrow. I will be heading off to the holidays a little bit early. So something that I'll be chewing on, though, is the idea of, can Nicholas Claxton be a poor man's Ben Simmons in the second unit, just from a ball handling and distributing standpoint? We know that he did it back in the day. His skill set is not nearly there. So don't ever think that I'm suggesting he's going to be getting 11 assists in a game. But if he can function enough, I think in a ball handling capacity, like just triggering the offense from the defensive end, like that's how he carves out a successful role if you're going to take him out of the starting lineup. It gets weird. And these guys are going to cross over their minutes. But maybe you're right. It's just disappointing that he's one of the best players on the team, and yet you're at an impasse because Ben Simmons' name and contract tells you that he'll have to always be the starter.
And Simmons should play over him. Like, I don't even want to suggest that like this version of Simmons. Sorry, this version of Simmons. I'm crying here. This version of Simmons should be playing over Claxton. I guess what I'm saying is these aren't mutually exclusive ideas. Because Nick Claxton has trouble playing with Ben Simmons does not mean Nick Claxton is not a good basketball player. I think sometimes people are doing this weird transitive property thing where because of this, then this other thing is true. But that's just not the case. It's just this is not the right situation for him. Okay, we are going to stick around here for a little bit. We're live on YouTube. Thanks for everyone that jumped in here to do a little therapy with us as we kind of work our way through the loss. We haven't done an extra live YouTube, so we're going to do that here for a little bit. We're going to close out the regular podcast. Make sure you are subscribed over on YouTube, Locked On Nets. Join the march to 4,000, hoping to get to 4,000 before the new year. That's the goal right now. So be part of the group that jumps into the Locked On Nets subscriber and set your alerts so you'll know that we're going live. We're going live just about after every game. So subscribe over at Locked On Nets on YouTube.
And of course, whatever nightmares the futures hold are but dreams compared to what's behind me. Gamora.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets, American. I'm not
Zoe
sure.
Saldana from
that Gamora. I thought it was like someone else. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, there you go. One of the all-time great poets.
Oh, that Gamora.
The real one. All right, we'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
And just like that, friends, we're in the podcast live on YouTube. Happy. Sometimes we have mild concerns, Doug, about how many people will want to come in and have a conversation about a crap game. Although, just with a little one eye on the old chat box over here, I think I saw some trade Claxtons fly by. That was a good one. Felt good about that. So I think I saw some trades, some Kyries. So there's just a lot of vibes out there. I will say the back end of that third segment, you put it the right way, where like there's a disappointment for me around Nicholas Claxton because it's like his role is getting marginalized in this instance right now. And it's going to take a dedication from the coaching staff to make this work properly with him and Ben Simmons on this roster.
Yeah, look, I think we would all agree, there's no debate here, that they would greatly benefit from having someone with size at like the 4 or 5 that could stretch the court. Like that is not a debate either. I don't think the Nets have enough bullets to like probably pull off the thing that most people want. As a reminder, trading the guy that stinks for your team now for the guy that's awesome for another team is not usually something other teams are into, even though fans want to it's like Harris can't hit a shot. We should trade him for a Turner.
Okay, but what if he also had a high contract, though? Would that change it for you, Doug?
Well, it's just hilarious. Of course they need someone that like in this place that could stretch the floor a little bit, that has like real size and rim running ability. Again, every team in the NBA wants that guy. So it's going to be hard to get. The Nets don't have them. It's more about the Claxton thing is I just mostly want to say what I said before, which is it's unfair to Claxton. Like he is a good player. He's just a good player. He's a good switchable big. He rates like higher than average on like, it was like a relative effective field goal percentage among switching bigs. He was like, he's an well above average defender. Like he is good. It's just that people can't stand it because it's not the exact thing that they want, and it doesn't look great with Simmons. And that's the part where I'm always going to push back against that.
Well, this will be interesting. I wanted to hit this one just because it's a different question. Sometimes we get volleyed the same things or people forcing for center trades. Do you think that a healthy TJ Warren can make it to the 6-man role and become a number 3 option? I mean, listen,
no.
My short answer was going to be no, but my long answer was going to be, I just want to see him practice and play basketball before I even worry about what his role can be. It's 2 years away from basketball, playing for TJ Warren
with no timetable to return, which was reported tonight. So
right.
It's
not happening. It's not my dream is that he could maybe just be a guy that is available for minutes, and that would be more than enough for me.
I'd have to see it. I mean, sorry to cut you off.
No.
I'd have to see it for multiple games of averaging 10 to 15 minutes per game for weeks. It's not happening. I feel bad for saying that. I want to be wrong. I would love, stamp this and make me wrong, and it would be good news, right? It's just that there can be no hopes pinned to this. The guy, like you said, the guy hasn't played in 2 years. He has no timetable return. I want him to come back, but it's just I don't know why we would even entertain a hope on that.
Yeah, and this one I was just curious about from T.
This is a good question, by the way. I was thinking about this the other day.
Sharp and Edwards, because that's the same thing. We talked about early in the season, it looked like Sharp had kind of carved out a role for himself over top of a Markieff Morris. Now, neither one of them really gets on the court, but Morris has been the more favored of the two. Sharp is all but buried for dumpster minutes. I'm not surprised by Edwards, I'll just say, because we went back to the summer league where we were like, boy, this doesn't look like a guy that took this next step forward. I don't see any role right now for Edwards as it stands, but I am surprised that Day'Ron Sharpe doesn't get used more. He's a big body. I just don't know what the harm can be in putting him out there, unless you think that you're going to do his development damage by overexposing him. But I'm surprised that he's been buried.
I meant to say this the other night, and I just didn't. And so I'm glad T Green, you brought this up. Excuse me. If he didn't play the other night against Adams,
yeah.
When Claxton got in foul trouble and Adams, who's just a drop center, who's just going to basically stand around the rim and never going to push you around the perimeter. And there's no Jaren Jackson either. So it was in that situation specifically, if he wasn't going to play in that matchup, then he's not playing at all. And I forgot to mention it after the Memphis game, because it just kind of got buried. Usually you talk about the players who do play and not the players who don't. But I did have that active thought. I was like, if it didn't happen here, then I cannot legit think of a scenario where it's going to happen for him, short of just everyone being injured and they have no other person to play center. But even in that case, they had no other person to play center and they just played Markieff Morris and he got steamrolled. So I just don't, if those aren't going to be if those minutes aren't going to be there for him, then I agree with this. What is the point? What's the point?
Oh yeah.
There is no point, because that is the situation. You're down Simmons. You have no, oh, sorry. Were they? Who wasn't in that game?
Down
sorry.
Claxton,
no, they were down Claxton. Right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, my bad. They're down Claxton already. Adams is destroying them. That's a situation that he could probably at least be physical against Adams, and he's not going to play. So I feel like if that's not going to happen outside of these garbage time minutes, it's just not going to happen at all.
Yeah. Another one from Wesley here. Are the Nets all in on this season or not? This team needs to change to fit around our best lineup. The one thing that I'll say about coming out of this Philly game and losing it, and then the kind of the up and down of this. So now what? 7 games with Steve Nash, now over to Jacques Vaughn, 8-game suspension for Kyrie Irving, his second game back underneath Jacques Vaughn. Now Ben Simmons playing well, but now introducing Kyrie into that mix. We had said that timeline of being, hey, give me 20 games. But it was also the intention of being 20 healthy, everyone available games. So someone asked this to me over on Twitter, and I think my response was Christmas. Give me it's going to be until Christmas now, because I just don't feel like I'll end up doing what felt like was happening early in the season. It's too much pendulum swinging on my reactions to what's going on. I know it doesn't look great tonight, but it looked great the other night, and it's looked great for a handful of games this season. So I need more of a sample size and to see what Jacques Vaughn intends to do now that he has Kyrie back and available. Remember, isn't it not about Kyrie being back these last 2 games, but the offense looked more fluid. It looked like it had a rhythm to it. That thing was existing. Can they keep that going while also sorting out the defensive end?
Yeah, I think the one thing you can kind of just like still feel okay about right now with the Nets is actually less to do with them and more to just do about the state of like the NBA right now. I mean, the Celtics have looked really good. The Bucks have looked really good. I think that's really no surprise, right? And the Cavs have looked really good. Like that experiment is totally working.
Yeah.
But after that, like these are the next three teams with the next best records in the East. The Pacers, 10-6. I mean, like, is that going to last? I don't think so, right? The Wizards at 10-7, they have a negative point differential and have 3 more wins, and then the Hawks at 10-7, and then you get the Sixers at 9-8, the Raptors at 9-8, the Knicks 9-9, the Brooklyn 8-10. So I think like the part where Brooklyn is still like a middle-ish of the pack team in the East. The teams that are above them are almost, I mean, at least 2 of these teams, and probably 3, if I'm going to count the Knicks in this group, are going to probably not continue to play where their record is now.
Right.
Like there is room for growth on the record, like not necessarily on the championship upside. I don't think that is anywhere close right
And honestly,
now.
8-10 through 18 with everything that's gone on, I'm almost like I take that as a bit of a win. Like, and again, just
Well,
from a record standpoint.
8-10. Oh, yeah. Well,
Not even from the results standpoint. You know what I mean?
well, it's
Like,
like funny because like their point differential, it doesn't feel this way because it feels like there's huge swings. Their point differential is about even, which would make them like really more like a 500 team. I know that's not going to make anyone feel better because
be the
point
7th
differential
best
isn't
differential.
your record, but like it's not. It depends where your aspirations are here. I'm off the championship aspiration train for sure.
Nice.
So, but I'm not necessarily on the blow up train because I think that there's a world where being a good team is still okay. Like in the NBA, people think about this differently. There's some people that are like championship or bust, and if you're not going for a championship, then what are you doing? I don't necessarily subscribe to that all the time because I think you see the NBA is more fun when teams are all just trying. Like these teams that I just mentioned that are punching way above their weight. So I think from the Nets perspective, I think you can look at this and say they have played one of the harder schedules by win percentage. They are around 500. The other teams that are above them are almost few of them are definitely going to take a step back. And so I'm not really jumping off a cliff here, but also again, like I mean, do you feel this way? Like, where do you feel? Like, there's like this team doesn't look like a championship team, like anywhere close.
No, and I guess now, and you and I, different points have agreed and disagreed about what they should or shouldn't do. But you said about I'm not pro blow it up, and I agree. Like I want to agree with that. I think the one thing that I take away from these first 18 games is Kevin Durant is playing some of the best basketball of his career on both ends of the floor right now. So from that standpoint, I think I'll go back to the Nicholas Claxton piece. This is where it gets weird, right? So in theory, Kyrie is leaving. Just everything else off the table from a pure basketball standpoint. You don't think this is a championship caliber team. He's in his final year. Would I explore trading him? Potentially. And that wouldn't even be saying we're blowing this whole thing up. We just want to reconstruct it and be a little bit forward thinking here. The problem then to your point is though, look at this rotation, take out Kyrie from it, and you have Ben Simmons and then Nicholas Claxton. Like then I think dominoes start to fall. Then it's like, well, is Simmons playing well enough ahead of the deadline that you would move him and do something totally different around Kevin Durant? Or do you say, Nicholas Claxton, you can't fit here with Kevin Durant and with Ben Simmons? We need to do something different. So it's probably a delicate balance, but I'm sure if you're a Pacers fan, you love that your team's being competitive, unless you're one of those, just disgusting sociopath that's only concerned about getting the number 1 draft pick and what it could mean. So I want the Nets to be competitive. I think it's hard for the fan base to look at this and say being competitive is enough for this team, right? Like that's the problem. It's the disconnect from what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, that's just going to be the time honored question here. Is that like what are your expectations now? My expectations off this have dropped. I also don't see a ton of outs for them. Like I don't think there are. No scenario here is good.
If there's a world where the Nets would be comfortable trading Ben Simmons, this track that he's on would make that attractive at the deadline, as opposed to the way we looked at the start of the year. He'd have to do it for another 20 plus games. But
I mean, it's completely hilarious. Where it'd be so funny if like Simmons was the one that reclamated his reclamated
out of
trade
all
value.
Of this, Ben Simmons goes on to join Team X, and
everyone else is going to just be at all time lows in trade value. And if Simmons was able to actually boost his trade value, that'd just be amazing. Yeah, so I don't know. I just don't think there's a lot of options. Their draft is a mess going forward. It's going to be really, really hard to build that back up. I think even like a guy in Kyrie, like on a rental now, is not going to get you much back. Like, and
No,
just because of his issues, like Harris, like who's trading for Harris's contract right now? He can't hit
I
a
think
three.
Curry's the one. Yeah, that's why I said before. Curry is the
Even
one that
Curry
gets
doesn't look
traded.
amazing. Like even Curry, it's like looks okay. It's not. He doesn't look. He's coming back from injury. I still don't think he's 100%. So
And they
like,
can trade you to Watanabe. I mean, he's the face of the franchise going forward.
I just don't think this is just going to be the devil's bargain they made here. I don't. I think that Nets fans probably need to brace themselves for
Just a sort of okay season.
Well, that's not so much that. I think they can have like a really good season. I think the wins. I think the wins are going to come around here. I do think that I'm not burying this team on a win-loss percentage right now.
No.
I think this team is good enough to win a lot of games here going forward. It's not that. It's just not like the ultimate upside piece. I think with each game that looks sort of like this, it does make you question a little bit like what the top end sort of ceiling is for the team. I think that's mostly what it is. And the other thing to prepare for is that like their blow up potential isn't going to reap tons of rewards. Like I don't think they have enough to go and really improve the team. Like I know people want a Miles Turner, people want these guys. Like I don't think they have enough to do it. And that's just the state that they put themselves in with the Harden trade and some of these other pieces. And so I just think that's the reality that people should probably just prep themselves for.
Yeah, if you're pro just blowing it up for the sake of starting over, you can be pro that while accepting that it's not going to be the blow up and rebuild with 17 first round draft picks from all the players.
No way.
Like
like they can't lucky, like they can, if they chose, they're not going to do it this year. I think they're going to be too good, but like they can blow it up for 1 year and try to get like a top 5 pick or something like that. And that would be it though. After that, they'd have to just try to recoup draft assets from other teams that'll probably be good, like whoever they trade Durant to or whatever. So it's just not going to happen. I kind of didn't want. I mean, this is my bad for taking us down this road. I don't think that. I will say this loss to the Sixers is annoying, but it's not. It's also just like not a sky's falling, the season's over for me moment either. Like I just think that's why I'm not going to go there. I don't think my overall opinion of the team has not really changed from this loss.
The one thing I will say is, like, remember, Memphis also didn't have key players in their last game, which the Nets won. So we're a little bit, I think it's better to wait and see than it is to make firm reactions on these last couple of games, especially the Philly one. And like I said, I don't know, like I can look at their schedule right now and say they're going to get 6 wins out of their next 10 because a lot of them are going to be home games, and there's a lot of suspect teams that are behind them in the Eastern Conference right now. So it'll be a little bit wait and see. I think we're going to wrap this one up here. Obviously, we appreciate everybody. I hope we got to enough of the questions that were out there. It's a little bit briefer maybe than we've normally done. Doug's got an extra lift here to do for us. So we'll get out the door. Doug will be in tomorrow following the Toronto Raptors post game. He'll be doing that coverage for you. And then I'll see everyone on the other side of the weekend. When we come back, I've already had Thanksgiving, Doug. It'll be great.
Yeah, I'll be back. I'm not going to do live, but I'll have an episode posted like right after the game tomorrow. So like that will be what the plan is. And we'll see you then. And then if we don't see you after the game tomorrow, have a good Thanksgiving, everybody. And for those folks, we'll be back. But make sure you just check it back in. I'll have something posted after the game tomorrow.
You'll see him. It's going to be great. Until then, though, we're back again talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.